Okay, so for the competitive inhibitor, its structure is similar to the substrate, so it competes with the substrate for the active site. It has its effect reversed by increasing substrate concentration. Now for non-competitive inhibitors, their structure is different than the substrates. The non-competitive inhibitor binds to an enzyme at a site other than the active site and changes the 3D shape of the active site. This prevents the binding of the substrate and therefore cannot have its effect reversed by adding more substrate.
Okay, so here's our pen cap example of a competitive inhibitor. Here we have the enzyme with the active site and the substrate. The substrate binds directly to the active site to then create a product. But if we have a competitive inhibitor here, which is similar in shape to the substrate, it will bind directly to the active site, which prevents the substrate from binding here. In the case of a competitive inhibitor, if you add more substrate, you'll be able to reverse the effects of a competitive inhibitor. So here we have more of a chance of the substrate binding to the active site to then create products. Next, we have our example of a non-competitive inhibitor. Here's the enzyme with the active site, and here's our substrate. The substrate binds to the active site like so. So if you ever need to put your paperclip into the pen, you've got it right here, like this. Alright, so next we have the non-competitive inhibitor, which I will use my finger here to change the shape of the enzyme, which thus changes the shape of the active site. So the substrate is not able to bind to the active site. Alright? In the case of a non-competitive inhibitor, adding more substrate will not reverse the effects. Oh no, can't bind.
So the question is the following. Which of the following is not true for a competitive inhibitor? A. Increasing the substrate concentration can reverse competitive inhibition. As we just saw in the pen cap example, this is true. B. Has a structure similar to the substrate. This is also true. It will bind to the exact same site and therefore has the same structure. And this site happens to be the active site, so B and C are both true. D. It cannot be converted to products. This is always true, also true. It's an inhibitor and not an actual enzyme. E. It binds to the enzyme at a site remote from the active site. We just seen that it binds to the active site and not to a site remote from it, so we'll circle that one. So the question is, a non-competitive inhibitor blank. A. Has a structure similar to the substrate. Well, we know this is the case of the competitive inhibitor and not of the non-competitive one, so this is false. B. Binds to the active site of the enzyme. Actually, this is also the competitive inhibitor because the non-competitive one will alter the structure of the enzyme by binding to another site that is not the active site. So this C is true. D has its effect reversed by adding more substrate. That will also be the case for the competitive and not the non-competitive inhibitor. Now E, increase the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. If we go back to the question, it says inhibitor, so it will inhibit the reaction, which will always decrease and not increase.